Good afternoon, everyone. Today, we are very honored to be joined by Professor Payam Akhavan, who has dedicated his life not only to the study of international law, but to the pursuit of justice in the deepest and most human sense. Please join me in welcoming Professor Akhavan to the stage.
Thank you, Balkees, for that very thoughtful introduction. I'm exceptionally proud to call you a former student, and based on the one course you took with me 20 years ago, I take full credit for all of your accomplishments. Chers collègues, chers amis, bonjour. Merci de m'avoir invité. It is a great honor to address you today to share some reflections on the pursuit of international justice. It is especially touching to address you here in Toronto, where my human rights journey first began. This family photo was taken in Tehran before we left for Canada. There is my handsome father, my glamorous mother, my mischievous older brother, and I am the one with the low-maintenance bowl haircut. For the record, I did not consent to that haircut. So this was a time of prosperity, a world of childhood innocence, but soon it would be shattered. The wondrous home I once knew would become a place of grief and sorrow. When we first arrived in Toronto, I didn't quite understand the meaning of persecution and exile. My parents sheltered me from the dark clouds that were gathering amidst the so-called Islamic Revolution. Iran was now a world away. As one of two brown children in my schoolyard, my priority was to become a Canadian patriot, even if I confused the theme from Hockey Night in Canada with the national anthem. As an immigrant adolescent, I entered a new phase of my assimilation process. I couldn't quite decide whether to dress as a rock star or a disco icon. In either scenario, I committed unspeakable fashion crimes. Back in Iran, it was political or religious beliefs that were criminalized in furtherance of a totalitarian ideology. The Islamic revolutionary courts had become the instrument of mass executions. Ayatollah Khomeini famously said that criminals should not be tried, they should be killed. My family belonged to the Baha'i religious minority. Khomeini deemed us infidels and apostates who should either convert or be killed. Among those who were arrested was my 16-year-old contemporary, Mona Mahmoudnejad, from the city of Shiraz. She was defiant and deeply committed to fighting for justice. In a high school essay, she wrote, "Why am I not free to express my ideas? Why don't you give me freedom of speech? Yes, liberty is a divine gift, and this gift is for us also, but you don't let us have it." Mona's inspiring courage would exact a heavy price. On 18 June 1983, she and 9 other Baha'i women were executed by hanging. When news of Mona's execution arrived, I asked myself, why her and not me? The difference between us was random. My family had moved to Canada, while hers remained in Iran. Her heroism stood in stark contrast with the empty consumerist culture that defined my life of privilege. What was my freedom worth, I asked, if it was wasted on selfish mediocrity? Faced with these existential questions, the pursuit of international justice was not a career choice. It was my only path of redemption. Justice is not an abstraction. It is born of empathy, a profound sense of responsibility towards amidst our inextricable interdependence. Evil triumphs when good people do nothing. But doing something cannot be equated with virtue signaling. We cannot create a better world without sacrifice, struggle, and suffering. In the years that followed, I had to make certain decisions about my future. As the children of immigrants, we had 3 career choices: law, medicine, or social disgrace. But for me, choosing law was not about bourgeois respectability. My utopian turn to international courts and tribunals was in desperate search of justice when all else had failed, except that there was no UN Human Rights Court, and at the time, no international criminal court other than the Nuremberg Tribunal that prosecuted the Nazi leaders in 1945. In 1993, 10 years after the execution of Mona, I found myself at a turning point in the evolution of international justice. The end of the Cold War in 1991 coincided with a violent disintegration of the former Yugoslavia and the horrors of ethnic cleansing. The mass execution of thousands of Bosnian men in Srebrenica became the first genocide in Europe since the Second World War. Still in my 20s, the UN sent me to Bosnia to investigate war crimes. I arrived trying to save the world. I left trying to save myself. My UN flight to besieged Sarajevo was memorable. At the check-in counter, someone had scribbled a sign, "Maybe airlines. Maybe you will arrive, maybe you won't." And here is the business class lounge at Sarajevo Airport for intrepid frequent flyers. The graffiti on a wall said, "Welcome to hell." The scenes were shocking. Here we discovered the burnt bodies of a family with small children in a home. Some things can never be unseen, and they leave us with moral certitude that justice must be pursued even against overwhelming odds. I was part of a diplomatic mission that had the courage to make the then ludicrous proposal that a special court be created to prosecute the perpetrators of these crimes. Here we are at the Austrian Foreign Ministry in Vienna drafting the report. The idea was ridiculed by some as naive and unrealistic. But there was a rare window of opportunity to achieve political consensus. In 1993, the UN Security Council established the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia. In 1996, I had the honor of pleading the first case before its appeals chamber. It was at a time when arresting the big fish was still a distant dream. The defendant was a young man named Dražen Erdemović. He had confessed to participating in the mass execution of 1,500 Muslims in Srebrenica in July 1995. He became an inside witness in the prosecution of senior leaders who were arrested in the years that followed, including General Ratko Mladić, the so-called Butcher of Bosnia, who was sentenced to life imprisonment in 2017. The Yugoslav Tribunal was a continuation of the Nuremberg legacy. It was followed by a second ad hoc tribunal for Rwanda after the 1994 genocide. This momentum led in 1998 to the establishment of the International Criminal Court at the Rome Diplomatic Conference. Despite some progress, over the past 30 years, the ICC is still marginalized in global politics. It struggles to maintain its integrity and independence amidst acute controversy. Speaking truth to power is not without consequences. Politics are selective, whereas justice is universal. There will be momentary setbacks, but we should stay the course, confident that we are on the right side of history. The ICC, of course, is not a panacea. There are significant impunity gaps because some of the worst offenders don't recognize the ICC's jurisdiction. Sometimes it is necessary to be innovative. A good example is the 2017 ethnic cleansing campaign against the Rohingya minority in Myanmar, which resulted in the displacement of almost 1 million refugees into neighboring Bangladesh. A UN fact-finding mission concluded in 2018 that this campaign constituted genocide. I visited Kutupalong, the largest refugee camp in the world, on the border of Myanmar. It was a sea of intense trauma. This little girl had witnessed the murder of her parents. She was among countless children wandering aimlessly in the camp. It is humbling to witness the reality of suffering, to realize, as Hannah Arendt famously said, that such crimes explode the limits of the law, to realize that while justice is imperative, it is also inadequate against the immensity of such crimes. I met with a group of women, traditional Muslims who were from impoverished farming communities, many of them illiterate. They shared horrific stories of sexual violence. Listening to their testimony was exhausting. As I was leaving, one of them said, "We look to you for justice." I didn't have the heart to say that accountability was unlikely given the cynical geopolitics of the conflict. I ignored the question and focused on this infant in his mother's arms. But leaving the survivors empty-handed haunted me. And then, as I was leaving the camp, I saw a beautiful sight that filled me with hope. There, in the middle of the camp, was a handmade wooden Ferris wheel with a long line of children waiting their turn to enjoy the ride. There was sound of laughter, a glimpse of humanity amidst the grief. Since the ICC did not have jurisdiction over the crime of genocide, one option was to bring a case before the International Court of Justice under the 1948 Genocide Convention, which Myanmar had ratified in better times in 1956. But the ICJ is not a human rights court. Victims have no standing. It is up to states to bring cases, and this is invariably a political decision. In 2019, after several months of efforts, the West African nation of the Gambia agreed to initiate proceedings and to request urgent provisional measures to expose Myanmar's atrocities and to win some measure of protection for the Rohingya. The historic hearing was scheduled for December 10th, coinciding with the anniversary of the adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948. There was considerable interest in the case, especially because the Nobel Prize laureates, Aung San Suu Kyi, had agreed to appear to defend Myanmar, a far cry from the Nobel Prize laureate that we had the privilege of listening to earlier today. Of course, the Hague bubble is a world away from the reality of the survivors. Amidst the spectacle of a hearing covered by the global media, with elite lawyers and distinguished professors pleading with erudition and eloquence, it was easy to forget why we were there. It was imperative to have at least some of the survivors there to witness the justice being dispensed on their behalf. Through the heroic efforts of some, we managed to get travel documents for 3 of the survivors. Here they are at Dhaka airport, terrified and anxious, having never traveled on an aircraft, having never stepped foot outside of their village. Their names were Hamida, Hasina, and Yusuf, each with a story of terrible suffering. When the Emirates Airlines agents heard their story at the check-in counter, they were upgraded to business class. They binge-watched all the Bollywood films on the entertainment system. What a contrast with Kutupalong refugee camp. On the day of the hearing, we huddled in the council room. They were intimidated by all the commotion at the ornate Peace Palace. I tried to reassure them. As Aung San Suu Kyi stood up in court to deny allegation of genocide before the judges, I wondered about the sense of betrayal they must have felt. On January 23rd, 2020, the court held unanimously in favor of the Gambia by 17 votes to 0. The Rohingya were jubilant. One of them said, "Now we too feel human." Hamida, Hasina, and Yusuf sent this celebratory image from Kutupalong, a reminder of just how far their journey had taken them. It was the first time I saw them smiling. It is such people that have been my greatest teachers, who have helped me understand why our humanity matters and why we should fight for justice, even if it is hurtful and devastating at times. In sharing these stories with you, I note that this year's Human Rights Watch Council Summit comes at a time when we witness an unprecedented rise of authoritarianism and populist hatred, not in distant lands, but in our own midst, in the heart of liberal democracies. We stand at an historical juncture with 2 competing visions of the future. One leads to a world in which might makes right, and the other leads to a world in which power is the servant of justice. This is a defining moment, including for us in Canada, who may have taken our progressive values for granted. If we stand for human rights and the rule of law, if that is at the core of our identity, then we must be prepared to pay a price. Instead of retreating in the face of these sinister political forces, now is the time for defiance and determination in pursuit of our ideals. Now is the time to exercise leadership by example. And this brings me to why we are gathered here today, in common cause to support the outstanding work of Human Rights Watch. The documentation of atrocities in their authoritative reports has had tremendous impact in the international justice space. The preservation of evidence, moreover, preserves the possibility of future justice. Above all, being a voice for the voiceless is crucial when political expedience would have us look the other way. These are the hallmarks of a reputable organization that is eminently worthy of our support. Your coming together in solidarity at this gathering is itself an act of resistance against injustice, an act of transformation from apathy and inaction to empathy and engagement. And have no doubt that your engagement will make a big difference for survivors around the world who seek to reclaim their humanity. As we ponder the difficult road ahead, and with gratitude for your patience, I will end, as any true Iranian will, with a poem by the legendary mystic Hafez from the city of Shiraz, where Mona drew her last breath. I wish I could show you, when you are lonely or in darkness, the astonishing light of your own being. Thank you.